as well, please, Chulo.
Yes?
Google has our own network.
Google, all right.
Google.
So we can start.
Okay.
Yes, we can start.
All right, everyone. Okay.
Thank
All right,
you.
so everyone's here. So everyone's here?
Yes,
Hello?
everyone is here.
And
Everyone is here.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I'm talking first, right?
All right.
Guys?
Yeah, but I'll let you know when you're ready. Okay.
Okay.
When you need to. All right. A very good afternoon to you all, trusting that you are all well this afternoon. Before we start, can I please check with everybody if you're okay with me recording the session?
I'm okay.
Okay. You can mute yourself, Prashant, for now.
All right.
All right.
Okay, good day, everybody. Esteemed colleagues, academics, professors, doctors, everyone, and welcome to today's seminar. Okay, so for today,
Thank you so much. Prashant, I will let you know when you will be speaking. I'm just going to introduce the session and then I will let you know when to talk. Thank you. Yeah, can I just give a warm welcome to our great audience, the esteemed guests and panelists to this webinar, the support and resources for the autism community. Okay, so the title of the webinar is The Support and Resources for the Autism Community, Challenges and Opportunities. I'm Dr. Mhlaba. I'm from the Discipline of Public Health Medicine in the College of Health Sciences. I have here my co-host, Mrs. Lisa Aziz from Action in Autism. Before we move ahead, I'm sure we are all aware that this webinar happens at a very saddening time in our province from the devastation that we are experiencing due to the floods that we've had recently. May I just please request that we observe a moment of silence now to honor the lives of those departed. Thank you. Thank you. So this webinar was actually created as part of the contribution to the Autism Awareness Month. The aim is to create an engagement session to identify the barriers or the challenges our autism communities face, whether young or old, at personal level, or even at service delivery level. So this session also aims to discuss the inclusive best practices and opportunities that we may exploit, and ultimately we need to develop a way forward, which we would appreciate input as well from you as the audience. So at the end of the day, we want this exercise to really highlight, and it's actually one of the efforts to recognize and acknowledge the pressing issues and to ensure that our autism communities are not left behind and that their human rights are upheld and prioritized. So just a quick house rules before we go ahead. We will allow each panelist to talk, and then from there we will have a question and answer session. You may write the question on the chat icon at the bottom of the screen below, or you may ask. Please be very short when you unmute yourself and ask the questions, 1 minute maximum if possible, please. So before I introduce the panelists, may I just please acknowledge our DVC who saw the need for us to have this session. Thank you. So I'll let my co-host at this point, Lisa, to introduce herself and briefly talk on some of the terminologies that are used in the autism space currently. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mshlaba and Dr. Mshlaba. I just want to say a great big welcome to everybody as well. And I have to say that it's so wonderful to share this webinar with such a diverse experience and illustrious panel. Webinars like these that confront and speak to the challenges experienced by the autistic community can only add to the inclusive strategies to alleviate the human rights transgressions experienced by autistics and their families. I am Lisa Aziz, and I've been steeped in the world of disability rights and advocacy when my son was diagnosed way back in 2004. Since then, I've worked to build Action in Autism, a disability people's organization and nonprofit organization for autistic people and their families. It has been both a gratifying and painful journey since our inroads with the Department of Education, KZN, the Autism Indaba in 2011, a think tank, and a resultant autism action plan in KZN to establish an inclusive education practice as per Education White Paper 6, Special Needs Education, Building an Inclusive Education System and Training System. And despite the fact that we have more special needs schools, i.e. Adolescent schools admitting autistic learners, we still confront many of the same barriers we experienced so many years back. We currently have an overburdened healthcare system, very few schools that include autistic learners, both in terms of discriminatory practices, admissions criteria, and a weak education curriculum and poor educator development program. And a paucity of psychosocial support to families in crisis. This webinar, therefore, is an important platform to address some of those challenges, recognize best practice, and begin the conversation on a way forward to adequately service the needs of the autism community. I thank Dr. Mshlaba and the DBC of UKZN for engaging with Action in Autism to make this a reality. Working from a human rights paradigm, Action in Autism has advocated vociferously to change the narrative and language on autism and to put the voices and agency of autistic people at the very forefront of this engagement. This is an evolving process. Many of our adult autistics have historically navigated a pitiful education system or have had no formal education at all, and their basic accommodations have not been met. But we are hopeful that this will change and that we will encounter a growing population of empowered autistics representing and advocating for themselves. What does it mean to work from a social human rights paradigm? It means to accept and respect the neurology of the autistic, to adapt the environment and provide support to accommodate the person's difference. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability calls this reasonable accommodations. That means we learn how our people communicate best, provide the means to communicate if the person is non-speaking, respect their decisions, and allow them to have agency over their own lives. We respect their preference to refer to themselves as autistic people. We use terminology such as high support needs and low support needs because many of our non-speaking adults with autism have resolutely proven through alternative augmentative communication means that they are thinking, profound human beings who have and are able to impact the world in which they're living in the most wondrous ways. We refer to them as non-speaking, not non-verbal, and most important, we learn about their world by listening and partnering with them, including them in every decision we make about them and ensuring they are heard, and hopefully they become part of the policy and legislative processes of this country. Nothing about us without us. That is the rallying call of the worldwide disability rights movement, and that's what we must honor. On that note, I would like to hand over to my wonderful co-host who will introduce our first speaker for today.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for that comprehensive introduction. Really, we appreciate just giving that overview and things that we may not be aware of and all the terminologies in the autism space. Right now, I am going to then move ahead to introduce our speakers. So we have a first speaker who is Prashant Parusnath from the autism community, diagnosed with autism. He's a graduate and holds a degree, Bachelor of Business Admin. And then we have our second speaker, Dr. Vasantha Govender, a pediatric neurologist from KZN Children's Hospital and Albert Lutuli Hospital. Third, we have Dr. Saida Paruk, a specialist child psychiatrist based at UKZN and King Dinuzulu Hospital. The fourth is Ms. Gugum Kize, a parent of a teen son who is also diagnosed with autism. The fifth one is Mrs. Humesh Archery, a social worker from Children's Hospital. And lastly, we have Ms. Nelisiwe Dunge, an inclusive education specialist and psychologist who works for the Department of Education in Zululand district. Over to you, Prashant. Thank you. Can you unmute Prashant? Thank you.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes,
Hello?
we can. Thank you.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. My name is Prashant Parasnath, and I have autism. I suppose you could say I'm a low support needs autistic, and I think everyone is familiar with mostly the high support needs autistics. I think I just want to talk about the basics of autism so you can understand where I'm coming from. So autism is a neurological disorder that affects the brain's ability to regulate social skills. If you think of any social skills, if you think of any, okay, and how it does this is it inhibits motor functions and the ability to use and interpret social skills because of sensory overload. The brain experiences sensory overload, and in autistics, it impedes these functions. So in normal autistics, the sensory overload is so great that sometimes they can't speak, sometimes they can't eat. And it's very difficult because even though they know what they want to say and they can understand body language, they cannot tell people what's going on, and you have to work extra hard to do that. It also includes delayed learning, so they take extra long to learn certain things, but they can be lived with. So non-speaking autistics and high support needs autistics, they have difficulties speaking but can understand body language. So low support needs autistics like myself, we have the opposite problem. That means my brain has issues with understanding body language. Let's think of everything. In fact, let's just think of the basic things that everyone needs to do. We need an education, we need jobs, we need a driver's license, we need to organize our bills, we need house, basically think of the first set of the two basic needs, food, water, shelter, and clothing. And then the second one, which is safety and security and love and relationships. These are extremely difficult for people like me to achieve on our own because we don't understand body language. So the vast majority of everything we say or do is through body language. Every relationship we build is based on the body language and based on how people perceive body language. Now, the thing about body language is that you don't realize you're doing it. For people who do not have autism, their brains are automatically picking up and interpreting and learning from body language in real time. All of it is happening at once. You pick up on things like posture, eye contact, hairstyle, facial expressions. mouth movements, and you interpret what people are saying. And the thing is, it needs to be consistent. These messages, in order to build relationships with, let's say, any person. Think of the relationships you need to basically survive. You need to go to the shops to communicate with, the person you're buying bread and milk from. Think of your taxes. Think of people at the SARS office. Think of police officers, your teachers, your doctors. The very basic relationships you have. These are going to be problems for people like me to maintain because we can give off the wrong message. And also, people are not aware of the difficulty that we have. And because of that, people think, because we keep sending messages, and because we don't know how to use body language, because our brains keep sending the wrong, misunderstanding the information, we end up miscommunicating to others. People can't understand what we're saying, even though we're using the words. Sometimes we use the wrong words when we mean something else, and sometimes, and in turn, we misunderstand what other people are saying, and it's very difficult to understand that in a job experience. In a job, you need to understand the basics of what to do in a situation, to trust, workplace politics, and as well as orders from your superiors. So that all becomes a problem when they can't understand what you are saying, when you have a problem communicating to them, trying to find the correct words to use, trying to regulate your body language. Now, these things like, expressions, tone of voice, all of these things, autistics like me have had to learn, and we had to watch ourselves constantly, because if I didn't know about these things, I'd be sending the wrong messages all the time, the wrong body language messages all the time. So Action and Autism stepped in, and they helped me to learn these things. Places like Action and Autism are very important because most autistics like me don't even know what their problem is. They're trying so hard, but imagine if you didn't know what your problem was, but every time you spoke, people misunderstood you, and you always misunderstood what other people were saying. Now, even though you can speak. And that's a very dangerous, and if you think of South Africa, and if you think of any situation, any dangerous situation you've been in, or even situations that are normal can turn dangerous because people misunderstand what you're saying. The wrong word, the wrong voice tone, the wrong gesture. Another thing is first impressions last. So if you think about doctors, if you think about getting a job, if you think about a driving instructor, if you're thinking about teachers, or any of these professionals we interact with, we need to survive, even psychologists, you need to be able to communicate effectively with them. With Action and Autism, I had no idea that there were so many factors to body language. In fact, wow, every time I talk, even like right now, I have to watch my posture, I have to watch my tone of voice, I have to watch my expressions. All of these things I have to make a conscious effort to monitor. And it's very difficult to do that, because even when I'm doing this, I could still use the wrong words. If I ever get overwhelmed, then even when I'm monitoring myself like this, I can still make a mistake, and I can still be in a situation where someone can misunderstand what I'm saying, and where I use the wrong words, where my brain knows what it's going to say, but when I talk, a different word comes out. It may be similar, but it's different. For example, when I was in school, there's this word called the state of being profound. It's called profundity, but I use the word profanity instead. So, when I talked about, I was just struck by this immense profanity, and it was amazing. So there are a lot of sentences like that. I meant to say a state of profoundness, but instead I used the word, I love the bad language. That's basically how everybody interpreted it. And there are numerous times where this happens, and it even happens when I'm watching myself, like right now. So I want to move on to the solutions I found to this. So I have, so I want to talk about, so we're learning about uh, coping strategies. One of the things I found out was that you're learning that not a lot of people know about autism, even the even the low support. So for me, what I found out from the doctors was that different mental disorders can come together in combinations. You know, you experience it all at the same time when you have autism. So for me, I suffer from, I think about 8 of these: short-term memory loss, psychotic depression, bipolar disorder, Tourette syndrome, ADHD, body dysmorphia, chronic fatigue, dissociative personality disorder. And on top of all of this, it's difficult for me to interpret what other people are saying and understand, and to make other people understand what I am saying. So one of the things I did was the psychologist suggested I take medication to calm myself down so that I'm not always overwhelmed, so that my system's not constantly overwhelmed by my surroundings, by noises and stuff. So I've been on Muzak, but I started out in 1996. Now, the first obstacle I faced was that not a lot of people at the time knew what autism was. So I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and they put me on this light medication, but it didn't work. And the problems really started when I finished school. I was able to matriculate, but not at a very high level. So, I just did the best that I could when I got into university, and I battled with my subjects immensely. I was on the brink of dropping out when I got in touch with Action in Autism, and that's when they advocated for me. In fact, this list of psychological disorders which they diagnosed, I only got diagnosed for this last year. So I guess you could say I've spent all of my life just working hard just to get the basics. So if you think of success, or people using the word basic as an insult, for me, I would kill to have the basics, because I have to work so hard and watch myself, and have so much of this mental stress, and it's really difficult just to get the basics right. And that's why places like Action in Autism are important, because I know a lot of people think that they have impressions of geniuses like nutty professors who with eccentric tendencies. We think of the Sheldon Coopers on TV, or the nutty professor, or even famous people like Albert Einstein or super scientists, or they always seem to have these strange quirks. But those guys are but as far as low support needs are concerned, those people are in the minority. There are very few Einsteins, there are very few Elon Musks or Bill Gates, and they have the support of their families, and most of them come from rich families. But the problem is, the vast majority of low autistics are people like me who don't even realize they're the problem. And it's extremely difficult for them. Now, if it's difficult for me to do these things, imagine how difficult it is for people with who are non-speaking and who are high support needs. So Action in Autism does a lot of needs for, they do these for both. They provide services for both levels of autism. So whether you're low support needs or high support needs, Action in Autism will help you. We have lots of parents who have no idea what's going on. My parents are still battling. I'm almost 40 years old. I'm 37 years old, and I still battle with basic things. Action in Autism basically saved my life when they intervened. When they intervened and had me registered as an autistic student. So the first thing is the paperwork for education. You have to get a diagnosis. Just getting a diagnosis is very difficult. So, through normal channels, it was very difficult for me to get psychological resources because they're so expensive. So actually, they've helped to advocate for me to get those resources together. They advocated for the paperwork. They got everything organized at UNISA. And they helped me with tutors. They helped me with my lectures. They help me with academic material. And they helped a lot, but at the same time, it's still difficult for me to get a job. So, so that's what Action in Autism does. They're still helping people. And on top of that, we are dealing with a pandemic. We are dealing with floods. We are dealing with climate change. We're dealing with mass poverty. If you think of the difficulties ordinary people have getting jobs, getting to university, getting even into school. Now those difficulties like skyrocket when you have low support needs of autism, and the support and the needs of low support autistics, those difficulties skyrocket when you have high support needs. And that is why places like Action in Autism are so important. We've had huge increases in the number of autistic cases, and places like autism are so important because parents need help, children need help, teenagers. If you think of puberty, that is, those difficulties also increase when you have autism. And lastly, people like me need help because even for a guy like me, I still have difficulties integrating in society. First impressions last, so I have to watch myself every time I speak to a doctor or a lawyer or a tax person, just getting the basic needs done. And even though I watch myself, I still have problems communicating with people. In fact, I still that's basically, I've stayed with Action in Autism. I've been with them since 2012. I'm still learning new things about body language and how to communicate effectively with people. And the thing that I had to learn, I think what's helped me the most is the art of self-forgiveness. So I'm just going to conclude that when you have what I have, you are constantly going to make mistakes with other people. So it's important not to be hard on yourself. Learning self-forgiveness is harder than you realize because we're all hard on ourselves because we live in a very performance-driven economy. Basically this entire planet is performance-driven. The workplace is performance-driven. We all have to be the best all the time, 24/7, 7 days a week. And just getting the basics done for people like me is extremely difficult. So that's what Action in Autism does. We help not only families, we help also people like me to basically get through in life, because in closing, you need consistency to build any relationships. But if you can't even get your foot in the door, if you don't even know how to build a relationship in the first place, if you can't meet the person in the first place, if they dismiss you, if you have a bad day, if you can't control what you're saying, because there's been an emergency, like someone's died, or something terrible has happened. Like right now, we're in a flood. And can you imagine what it's like for a person like me who doesn't know what's going on with them, who's so overwhelmed, and then they have to work to communicate with doctors, aid workers, or if they've had an emergency, or if they don't have parents. So they have the same difficulties I have, except they don't have the support of places like Action in Autism, and that's why we need this place. So that's why we need places like Action in Autism, and that's why we need your support to help others like this. So to help families, to help children, and together we can find solutions to this. Not a lot of people know about autism, and that's why we need conferences like this. That's why we need doctors to listen in these times, and that is why Action in Autism exists, to create awareness and to help everyone in need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prashant. Thank you. We really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yes, yeah. You have concisely, summarized your lived experiences, having to struggle through, and we really appreciate that. And I'm sure that we are getting, educated based on your talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor.
So, all right. From now, can we have our second speaker, Dr. Vasantha Govinda, the pediatric neurologist? Thank you. Over to you, Vasantha.
I'm trying to share my screen. Doesn't seem to be working. Can you hear me?
I not very clearly. Could you try that again?
Hi, I'm
Okay. Okay. Hold on. Hello. Can anybody hear? Can anybody else? Is anybody else having problems
Prashant,
here?
can you put your mic off, please?
Okay, let me switch this off.
Thank
let me just
you.
mute this thing.
Thank you, Prashant. Thank you, Prashant. Vasanta, we can see your slides now. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you may proceed.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys, and thank you, Prashant. It was very enlightening. And I just want to add on to his experience, and it's we can only gain from the experience from the patients that we meet, from the families that we come into every day at KZN Children's Hospital. And so I just want to go a little bit of the journey of some of our patients and some of the problems that they experience, and just to have a brief overview of autism. So,
Sorry, Basanta.
Vasanta,
yes.
your sound quality is quite poor. Is there a way you can maybe move around? See if you can just...
Can I try talking louder? Can you hear me now?
Can you get closer to the mic, Vasanta?
Okay, I'm trying now. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Slightly much better. Thank you.
Okay. So autism, I don't know that there's an underlying problem with the genes, which is the building block of a child. And usually it's something else that goes on, whether it's immunological, perinatal, something wrong with the actual brain structure, or environmental problems and toxins, and sometimes even infections. But everyone needs to understand that autism is not caused by bad parenting or mother stress. And it's not.
Basanta, I think we're going to have to find another way of, if you can go off and connect again, because you're still not very clear.
Okay, but let me try my phone.
Mm.
Hi, can you guys hear me now?
A little bit better. Can we see you as well? That would help us.
Let me try. Can you guys see?
I think it's your ear that we see.
Oh God. Okay, if you can see the slides, on my phone.
Your video, I think we need to... Can you move a little backwards so we can see your face?
Okay, I'm trying now.
Much better.
Okay, it's just the sound that's the problem. So you can see that autism is caused by the developing brain and the connections in the brain. And this causes problems in social interaction with repetitive behavior and poor communication. And we all know that it's a very difficult journey for parents, very difficult journey for patients itself, for the patient. So there are many, many mountains to climb. I'm trying to proceed. I can't seem to move my slide. Oh, God. Guys, I can't seem to. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. But
No,
it seems you seem to have a network problem, though.
Yeah, I seem to have a network problem here. I'm just trying to connect.
Whilst Vasanta's connecting, would all the participants please write in your questions and keep your questions for the Q&A at the end, and we will put it to the entire panel. Thank you.
Guys, can you hear me now?
Proceed, Vasanta.
Okay, so sorry about that. I can't seem to be changing my screen. I'm trying to just connect otherwise.
Should we let Sahida speak next? And while
Let's say that,
Vasanta-
and then I'll try and connect otherwise.
yeah, can Dr. Sahida Paruk come in, please? Child psychiatrist, thank you. Sahida, are you there? Doesn't seem we're getting Sahida. Gugu, are you there?
Yes. Yes, Gugu's here.
Can you proceed, Gugu? Gugu is a parent. Thank you very much.
My name is Gugu. I am Tawanda's mother. Okay, my name is Gugu. I am Tawanda's mother. Tawanda is 14 years old. For the past 14 years, it has not been easy for me to raise my autistic son as a single parent. After Tawanda was diagnosed, I traveled more than 100 kilometers to Sydney daily for 3 years for his early intervention education. Then he went to a special needs primary school where towards the end of the 4th term, I was told that Tawanda was not coping academically, and they had even organized an interview with the school where he would do the skills. I then told them that enough was enough, I would keep my child at home. But they said they were not expelling the child from their school. Medication is very expensive. Tawanda's medical funds last for only 3 months. Then for the following 9 months, after exhaustion of funds, I pay cash for medication. Last year, adolescent stage, in Tawanda's life, in our lives, me and my siblings, brought huge changes which affected the whole family emotionally, mentally, and physically. Sometimes I was scared to go back home after work. Towards the end of 2020, Tawanda had been referred to the psychiatrist by the neuropediatrician, but because of COVID-19, he got the appointment early in February 2021. For the first 6 months after seeing the psychiatrist, medication was not working. And this 6 months, we were changing medication every 2 weeks until beginning of August 2021, where for the first time in 13 years, we noticed 95% change in Tawanda's behavior, calmness, and sleeping routine. People in our communities still do not understand autism. They are very ignorant when it comes to people with disabilities. The way they speak and treat them. Sometimes even the extended family. Lastly, I just want to share my experience, which happened during the Autism Month in 2019. On the 26th of April 2019, I appeared in court because my immediate neighbors had filed the protection order against me, claiming that Tawanda had thrown stones at their property and pushed one of their children. Instead of speaking to me as Tawanda's mother in period, they resorted to pushing Tawanda, swearing and screaming at him, telling me to belt up my pig. We ended up having a big, ugly altercation. I stood up for my son. And the next thing, the following day, was the protection order, which I refused to sign. Fortunately, the magistrate listened to my story with understanding and said the matter was not for the police. He even mentioned that Tawanda had disability and would not stand any case after brief information on autism by the member of Action in Autism who was there to support me in my explanation of the sequence of events that led to the altercation and Tawanda's behavior towards them.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Gugu, for that narration of your lived experience. We appreciate that. While the doctors are sorting themselves, can I ask Mrs. Humesh Atri, social worker, can you please unmute yourself and come to the screen? Thank you. Humesh, are you there?
Chulo, what I understand is that the problem seems to be from the host's perspective, that they need to unmute Dr. Saida Parak as well as Dr. Govender.
All right, let me see if I can unmute them. Thank you.
They couldn't hear me when I was trying to speak. Okay. Let's see what happens.
Umesh is unmuted.
You may proceed then, Himesh. Thank you.
Host, would you kindly unmute all Humeshes? There seems to be quite a number of Humeshes. One of them is the right person.
Sure. All right, thank you.
Vasantha, are you ready?
I'm not sure whether I can't seem to share my screen again. Can you guys hear?
Yes, we can. Host, would you allow Vasantha to share screen?
All right, thank you.
Okay, I think I'm just going to talk. I'm going to.
I'm trying to make you a host, Vasantha, so that you can share screen. Okay?
While she's trying to do that, I'm just going to talk on the aspects that I wanted to mention. As we said, autism is such a complex underlying condition, and there are various aspects of the child's being that is affected. Their social communication, their behavior, whether it's repetitive behavior, stereotypic behavior, and poor communication.
Vasantha,
Yes.
this is not working, my dear. It's not working. So sorry.
Okay, you can't. Okay then. Can somebody else? Is Humesh's screen being able to be seen?
Humesh, are you ready?
Hello. Okay, I'll send it to you. Okay.
Vasantha, we can see your screen now. Dr. Govender, we can see your screen.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So as you can see, a child with autism has got very poor self-regulation. There's problems in simultaneously engaging in multiple tasks and understanding complex or abstract concepts. And that was as Prashant had alluded to before. And they have to process stimuli in a fragmented fashion and have problems integrating information into meaningful wholes. Okay, so the children with autism have not just their communication and repetitive behaviors. There are various comorbid conditions that affect them and that cause so many more problems as well. So hyperactivity or ADHD is a very common comorbid problem. Food hypersensitivity and pickiness to food is very common. Seizures and epilepsy is very common in these children. Up to 1/3 of children can get epilepsy. Sleep disorders is a very common problem, and these children do not get quality sleep. The family does not get quality sleep, and furthermore, anxiety problems, depression, and some children also have cognitive impairment. But it must also be noted that it is very difficult to assess a child with full cognitive problems because some children are non-verbal, and not being able to speak is not the same as not having anything to say. And then a lot of these children will have intact cognition, but it's so difficult for them to communicate this. There's a lot of social comorbidities, including increased levels of family stress, school refusal behaviors as well. the other common problem that children have are meltdowns, and these are not just temper tantrums. It may be a sign that the child is not coping, and the child. It's important to sort of watch out for these and to be able to know when they are coming. So a child may increase their pace, they may start flapping, spinning, or talking loudly. This is a sign that your child needs extra support or rest from the situation. So we need to be calm, to slow down, decrease eye contact, and lower your voice and redirect the child to a calm and quiet space. When the child is calm, to try and teach them about their emotions and to use a stress ball or pillow. But the problem is it's easier said than done. And this is where early intervention is so important. And places like Action in Autism and our occupational therapists, physiotherapists, speech therapists are so important at this stage in life. So early diagnosis is absolutely paramount. And the brain is still growing, it's still plastic. And this is when we need to intervene. And children learn best by doing things. And they need to be prompted and to provide support in every situation. You have to have maximum face-to-face interaction, and you have to encourage their engagement. So you start with their own interests and activities, and in this way we tell them that we accept them. We also have to look at sensory difficulties. We need to limit negative language, refrain from reframe our language, help children to know what to do and what not to do. So you have to refrain from too many no's and don'ts. We will only resort to medication when the other therapies have failed and the child is endangering his or her life and cannot sleep. It is also used when there's severe attention and hyperactivity problems, where speech development will improve to increase the attention. There are, however, side effects like weight gain for drugs like risperidone and Abilify, and also methylphenidate or Ritalin can cause a decrease in appetite and mood swings. And a lot of parents, try all different types of alternative therapies, but it has been shown like things like gluten-free diets and casein-free diets do not actually work. And some parents will, some patients will benefit from probiotics because of the gut-brain barrier. And our important thing is to try and get them into an early intervention center or schooling early, where they can get therapy, constantly. Learning should incorporate visual methods and should focus and build on their strengths rather than dwell on their weaknesses. They need to be helped with their social interactions, and one has to explain to them what to expect in different social settings and how to react. And also an in-depth functional analysis. So it may sound complex, but basically it's breaking down in detail exactly what happens and the order in which it was happening in order to understand what triggers their emotional meltdowns and how to deal with them. So there's lots of problems, challenges that we experienced. And this was reflected in a study that was done at KwaZulu-Natal Children's Hospital. And they had studied about 114 patients with autism. And what they had found out was that most of the children were diagnosed after 3 to 4 years of age. And there was a 24-month delay between the onset of symptoms suggested of ASD and their presentation to a healthcare facility. The other thing that it also highlighted was that 50% of participants were still awaiting special schools. And ADHD was most common comorbidity, affecting about 43% of participants. So there's various challenges to why this is happening. And schools are always waiting for the children to be diagnosed by a pediatric neurologist, and maybe that is not the way to go. We have to accept diagnosis from pediatricians, from other members of society in order to get children access into schooling and access for therapy as well. So obviously we are just one facility in the whole of KZN, and we are overburdened. Our waiting times are very long. But one option is if we can introduce screening for features of ASD into our road to health immunization visits at 18 to 24 months, then that is really ideal. And obviously, teaching of autism and neurodevelopmental disorders to undergraduate curriculums, and also in all aspects of healthcare workers, nurses included. The acceptance of the diagnosis is not easy for parents, and that's where the support groups come into play. And getting to understand their child is of utmost importance. And taking small steps is very critically important. Otherwise, you will find it difficult, to see the light above the trees. There was a good quote on, that was actually done by one of the autistic children, is that, I am a child first and foremost. Autism is just one aspect of my character. Ordinary sights and sounds and touches of everyday life that are normal to you can be painful to me. It isn't that I just don't listen. It's just that I can't understand you. And I like routines because I know what to expect. Don't compare me with other children. I'm special in my own way. And it's hard for me to tell you what I need when I don't know what the words to say. So be patient and consistent. I learn better when you tell me and show me to do things. Focus and build on what I can do rather than what I can't. And I want to be with others, but I don't know how. So love me unconditionally because I promise you I am worth it. So basically, appreciate the small victories and love your child with great pride and in their small accomplishments, and focus on what they can do instead of making comparisons with neurotypically developing children. So I'll leave you. So hopefully, with the rest of our presentations, we're going to highlight more of the problems that are faced with our children. But we need to never lose hope and perseverance. And together, as an as a community, with the help of NGOs, the support organizations like Action in Autism, the road ahead can be less daunting. Okay, I'm going to end now.
Thank you very much, Vasantha. Thank you for that explanation and describing exactly what you do, and especially the coping strategies that parents would employ in their lives, and what the issues are in terms of medical, behavioral, psychological, as well as biological. Thank you so much for that. I believe Himesh, you are ready now. You are okay. Can you proceed? Himesh is our social worker. Thank you. It looks like Himesh is getting delayed. Can I, in the meantime, ask Ms. Nelisiwe Dunge? She's our inclusive education specialist and psychologist to come forth. Are you able to hear us, Nelly?
Thank you, Doctor. I can hear you.
Thank you. Proceed.
Okay. I would like to explain, Doctor, as much as I'm the inclusive education specialist, but today I'm wearing another cap. I'm wearing a cap of being a board member from Action in Autism. Okay. I'm going to, okay, it's twofold. Mine is twofold. I'm going to speak under educational perspective as well as under psychological perspective.
Nelly, would you put your camera on, please?
Okay, I was trying to share my screen. Hello.
We can hear you.
Okay, can you see my
Yes,
screen?
we can.
Okay, no, thank you so much. I'll just jump into slide number 2. The problem statement for me, because I'm speaking from an educational as well as a psychological perspective. So I was looking at the prevalence of autism worldwide, which states that it is between 1 and 2% of the population that are affected, that are having autism. And also the research by Human Rights Watch in 2015, it did state that South Africa has failed to enforce the right to education for many children with disabilities. And that is supported by the research by De Vries 2017, as well as Mtimunya in 2018, where they stated that great number of autistic children, they still cannot access education and they are still undiagnosed, especially if they live in rural areas. Then the question is, how far have we made progress as South Africa? I know I'm not going to dwell much on this, but it started way back when South Africa attended as one of the 54 countries. They started in Thailand and then 54 countries in Spain. When they came back with white paper number 1. And then in 2000, they came back and promulgated the policy, which is called White Paper 6, which is the policy that talks into inclusion. And then later on in 2008, they attended the UN Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Then they came up with a draft of CIAS. And then at a later stage, then in 2014, that is when the whole CIAS was promulgated. Now I'm looking at the policies that supports inclusion. One of the policies, it is Education White Paper 5, because it prioritizes the development of a strategic plan for intersectoral collaboration, focusing on the effort on improving the quality of early learning programs, which means that according to White Paper 5, it states, or it emphasizes the issue of early identification, that all the autistic children or all the children that have got disabilities, they need to be identified early so that the proper intervention can be rendered. Another policy, it was White Paper 6, which was promulgated in 2001, which talks about building an inclusive system that caters for all children without discrimination. And then lastly, it is the CIAS, which talks about screening, identification, assessment, and support, which was promulgated in 2014, which led to the introduction of the strength-based assessment, because we know that prior to that, the assessment, it focused on the deficit rather than the strength. But then can we look at the principles of Education White Paper 6 before we can look at the challenges as well as the strength? One of the principles, it is human rights, that every child has a human right. Every child has got social justice. What does that mean? It means the distribution of opportunities for all learners, it should be the same. But then the question is, when it comes to autistic children, this doesn't apply to them, because we still see lots and lots of them staying at home, not being diagnosed, not being accessing education. It talks about participation, social integration. They are not integrated socially because we do not see them. And also because of the sensory input, you find that they are restricted. They cannot just go to whatever place that the parent can wish to, because of their sensitivity to sensory. And then lastly, it is about the equal access to single inclusive education. This is a good policy. This is a good principle. But then in reality, we do not see this, because I think around 85% of autistic children are still at home. They are not accessing education. So there is no equal access. Yes, other disabilities are accessing education, but this is not true when it comes to autistic children. Yes, a good thing has happened. We've seen a shift from education. There has been a lot of shift from the medical model, because with the medical model, the problem was seen to be fixated on the child. And instead of looking at how the environment can assist the child to perform to the best of his or her ability. So now we are seeing these multidisciplinary teams that are working in order to detect if the child is indicative of autism, and also so that the relevant interventions can be provided to the child. This takes us to the ecological theory, which says the focus should be on the environment. We're looking at the environment and we see how best is the environment assisting this child in order to reach his or her full potential. Okay, then the question is, we spoke about Education White Paper 5, which talks about early identification. Why the early identification? The reason is, it is very much imperative that early identification of autism is conducted so that we enable the provision of intervention with regards to the behavior. I heard Dr. was talking about the behavior. That behavior, which is some kind of communication, because as most of the autistic children are non-verbal, so it is difficult for them to convey whatever feelings and emotions that they have. The only way they know best to convey the message, it is through the behavior. Hence, it is seen, they are seen as having behavioral problem. And then 2, it is to increase the chances so that these autistic children, they can access support, the intervention, as well as the formal schooling. And this emanated in 2011, when there were a lot of engagements between Department of Education, Action in Autism, and other NGOs, which led to quite a number of learners who were able to access education. And also, another reason for early identification, it is to focus on the strength-based assessment, meaning that we're no longer looking at the deficit, but we're looking at the child. What are the interests of the child? What are the interests of the child? Yes, so that we focus on that strength of the child. And yes. And then the strength now, I'm going to start with the strength for Department of Education. After that rigorous engagement between education and the NGOs, it led to the Autism Indaba. And after the Autism Indaba, it was then agreed, there was a memorandum of understanding, and some of the things that emanated from the Autism Indaba, it was the increase in access to education for autistic children, which is very much good. But we are still complaining because there isn't much increase that we are seeing. Yes, there are introduction of units in most special schools, but they still feel like a drop in the ocean when we look at the number of autistic children that are still out there who are not accessing education. And also when we're looking at some of the red tapes that are being placed on these children, for instance, the issue of a child who's on nappies, who cannot go to school, who cannot be admitted at a school just because the child is on nappies. So that reduces the number which was agreed on during the Autism Indaba. What is good is that we have seen Department of Education devolving funds, and those funds are solely for incurring cost for assistive devices and other high levels of support. And then lastly, it is, we've seen nationally where it is stated that according to the research conducted by NADU in 2021, that there are around 4,800 educators who are participating in the in-service training program nationally. And if 4,800 is nationally, the question is how many with regards to KZN where we are? So it's still like a drop in the ocean. We still need to see more of this as much as it is a strength. Now coming to the challenges, you know, a picture of inequity of provision and opportunities, because so many children can access education, but when it comes to autistic children, there are still, you know, boundaries. There are still red tapes, like I said earlier on. One of them, it will be the waiting period, where a child will wait for years without getting access to a school. 2, it is the educator's lack of proper qualification to teach these autistic children, because teachers are there in special school, but the reality is they are not trained to teach autistic children. Number 3, it is the inavailability of the resources. The resources that I'm talking about, it is the specialist support in special school. You go to special schools, especially those in rural areas, you won't find therapists. There are no psychologists. So it's only teachers. So even if the unit is there, but there is no relevant intervention that is provided, which could have been provided by the specialist. Another resource, it is the material or the assistive devices. Yes, the department is devolving the funds, but then the question is, are we having enough assistive devices which will enhance learning as well as communication for autistic children? The question is no. Lastly, it is the lack of teacher training. Teachers, they're there, they're taught, they're trained, but the training that teachers get from universities, it doesn't equip them with skills that will enable them to accommodate an autistic child in a mainstream school. I remember we did explain, it was explained earlier that there are those with low level of support and those that require high level of support. For those that require low level of support, they're supposed to be in mainstream schools and they're supposed to be learning in an ordinary class. But then the relevant support should be there, assistive devices and other support should be available to them, which is what is still lacking even now. Another challenge, it is the non-building of extra classes in the existing special schools. We do have special schools, but when a parent applies, the question will be, the unit is full, so the child cannot be enrolled in the school. And also when looking at KZN, as compared to Western Cape and Gauteng, they do have dedicated special schools for autistic children, which is something that we do not have within the province, which is a challenge. And we also looking at the lack of community awareness, because the community out there, they do not know what autism is. Even the families, you find that the child is within the family, but the extended family, they do not understand. So there isn't much support that is received by the parent. So you find that the parent is distressed because there's no support within the family. And also the teacher's negative approach. Once it is mentioned that the child is autistic, then what the teacher will think of, it will be special school, without having looked at the level of support that is required by that particular individual learner. And lastly, it is the inavailability of support groups for parents of autistic children in our special schools. We feel that if we can have support groups so that parents can gather together and share their experiences, because some parents, they've been with this child for so long, so they know the do's and the don'ts. They've done trial and error, but for some, their children have just been diagnosed, so they are still battling. There's an issue of denial, an issue also of what kind of support should I render here. But then if you can have support groups in our special schools, that can assist a lot, because parents can have that platform to learn from one another. Now moving to the psychologist, there isn't much that I'm going to talk about, because under psychologist. One, yes, we do have psychologists conducting assessment, but mostly those psychologists are independent psychologists, not from a Department of Education and also Department of Health. Because when you go to rural hospitals, there are no psychologists. Even if they are there, you find that they come on a ComServe basis and then they leave. So you find that parents, they have to travel like 200 kilometers to get to a place where they can have an assessment conducted. Yes, we are seeing just, an increase in number, which is not enough for Black psychologists to enable those children from deep rural areas to be able to be diagnosed. And then, yes, we are seeing a little bit of training, which is happening on a small scale to capacitate schools and communities on autism. But it happens to those districts who have a psychologist. And out of 12, I think they're like 2 or 3. Then what are the challenges now with regards to the psychologist? The inavailability of psychologists in special schools. Like I said, there are 74 special schools, but those who are having psychologists, maybe they're like 5. They're not more than that. So the rest of the schools, they do not have the services of a psychologist. Then the question is, who is conducting assessment? Who is providing the therapeutic support which is needed by the autistic child in that particular school? And the limited numbers of psychologists that are trained by higher education institution. I remember in UKZN, we were only 15. It was 4 counseling, 5 clinical, and 6 education. That is just a drop in the ocean when you're looking at how psychologists are needed when you go out there. There is a need for psychologists. So we appeal to higher education institution just to increase the number of psychologists that are enrolled so that we can have more support conducted by the psychologists out there. And also, even if psychologists are trained now, but there are few who are equipped with skills to render therapeutic intervention to autistic children. I remember Doctor was talking about the behavior that will be exhibited by the child when the child is trying to communicate and everybody else doesn't understand the language that the child is exhibiting. Then the child will need therapeutic intervention. Hence, we are saying throughout the modules, can we have more content on autism when it comes to higher education institution? And also, we here in South Africa, there's lack of institutions that conduct training on the assessment of autistic children. For instance, the ADOS 2, there's only one, which is in Cape Town. And that training, it takes place once a year. Yet there is a vast need of psychologists to be trained on the ADOS 2 so that they can be able then to conduct the training to the best of their ability. And the insufficient and undergraduate and postgraduate content on autism and other neurological conditions at universities. Yes, there is an element of autism, but we feel that if it can be increased so that it can capacitate and equip these psychologists to perform their duties fully when they leave the institution. Lastly, it was just the challenges for the parents. I think most of the parents, they lack knowledge about ASD, hence they don't even know that the child is indicative of autism. Also, the insight into the impact of ASD on the parent's life. You know, that frustration of wanting people to understand and accept the child, yet people, they see this child as being spoiled and all of that. The issues between families, where you find that there will be, you know, there won't be a stability now between the families, just because maybe one parent is looking at another parent to say, maybe this comes from your family genetics and all of that. But also the decreased parenting efficacy. Parents, they still need to be trained on what kind of support can they render to their autistic children while still at home, even before they can go to school. And lastly, it is the enormous psychological distress, depression, anxiety, and other mental and physical health problems that parents of autistic children have. It's so sad. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelly, for that concise description of challenges and really nicely put. Can I please check, Saida, are you okay to present now?
Yes, can I start?
Thank you.
Nelly, can you stop sharing?
Oh, okay, no, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me and see my slides?
We can hear you, but yeah, we can see a slide now.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the host for inviting me to speak at this forum. I was asked to speak around psychiatric services and the perspective of mental health practitioners on the state of ASD services in KwaZulu-Natal. So I'm going to very briefly cover a little bit on autistic spectrum disorders, look at our overview of services and challenges and opportunities in the KwaZulu-Natal area, and also discuss a little bit about our pediatric neurology psychiatry clinical collaboration at the KZN Children's Hospital. So as you're all aware, autistic spectrum disorder...
Shaida, sorry, we still can't see your slides.
Okay, let me try to share screen again.
Thank you.
Can you see that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So, so just going back, so as you're all aware, that autistic spectrum disorder refers to a group of neurodevelopmental conditions which are defined as impairment in two significant areas: social interaction and communication, whether that is verbal or nonverbal, and stereotype, restricted, repetitive behavior, interest, and activity problems. So these are the two main spheres in which our children with ASD have their impairments. What's quite important is that we learn to recognize autism early, because the most important thing with autism is that early intervention helps improve outcomes, helps us provide better support for our children, and helps them have hopefully better integration as they grow older. So I think often when we see children who are having difficulty relating to other children, especially, or to adults, to the point where they can't interact even with immediate family members such as grandparents, aunts, uncles, where they have poor speech or lack of speech past age 3, inappropriate laughter or crying at times when it doesn't call for it in that social context, oversensitivity or undersensitivity to certain sounds or textures or even tastes or smells, inappropriate playing with toys, so they don't have that imaginative play where they create a little bit of a fantasy world, but they keep stacking the toys in the same way, putting things in the same monotonous series all the time and not changing things easily. Difficulty with changes in their daily routine, such as change in clothes or change in routine, such as school closes, etc. And difficulty adjusting to people touching them, etc. Then maybe think about whether the child may be on the spectrum or not. It may not be, but sometimes these are certain signs that suggest these children may have autism. Autism, as stated in the earlier presentations, is being increasingly recognized, and we now say that about 1 in 88 children does have autism. The severity of the autism and the need for care will differ, the need for support may differ, but autism does not discriminate. It occurs in all racial groups, all ethnic groups, all socioeconomic groups, all language groups, etc. However, it is more common in boys versus girls. Yeah, the neurological manifestations of autism are now well established to some extent. We know there's a strong genetic basis. We know that it's a neurological disorder involving certain parts of the brain, and the connectivity is not as well developed as in neurotypically developed children. And they may also often have a higher risk of seizures. So these children, because of this underlying neurodevelopmental problem, are more likely to develop psychiatric problems. These could manifest in the form of behavioral problems, where the children may display aggression certain stereotypic behaviors because of their inability to connect the different aspects in their life. For them to adjust to change, to people, to lots of noise, etc., will be difficult, and therefore their frustration may manifest in the form of either aggression or temper outbursts or meltdowns. Often children with autism spectrum problems also have comorbid intellectual disability, but that may not be the case in all children. They may also be more prone to hyperactivity or have comorbid attention deficit hyperactive disorder. They're also more likely to sometimes display obsessive compulsive type behavior, which may be part of their autism. They may have tics and Tourette's, which is often comorbid in neurodevelopmental children. And because of the deficits and their also insight into the deficits, their frustration about the deficits, they may develop depression, anxiety, and mood problems. Psychosis is a much more rare complication that will occur much later in life. Unfortunately, in children with neurodevelopmental problems, we tend to have more than one disorder. So there's often comorbidities. There may be ASD with ADHD, ASD with intellectual disability, ASD with epilepsy or other disruptive behavior problems. So one also needs to, when making a diagnosis of ASD, to look for comorbidities because it's important to address them in the management. So in terms of management, best practice for ASD, we know there's no cure for most psychiatric disorders and neurodevelopmental problems, but we can manage them well. We can have our children integrated into society and they can have meaningful contributions to make. What's quite important is that we individualize the treatment based on that child's symptom spectrum and severity of disease. And for that, we need early recognition and early intervention. I'm probably one of the least important people on this team because as a psychiatrist, my main roles would be, I think, diagnostic clarification and providing psychotropic support where other forms of treatment have failed. But what is key is having a good team with educational support, speech therapy, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, clinical and educational psychology, dietitians, because often these are very picky eaters, and also the medication may cause either increase or decrease in appetite. And then obviously my role and the role of the pediatricians is to kind of coordinate this team and to provide medication where required. So the WHO has also in 2014 recognized the importance of us focusing on comprehensive and coordinated effort to manage ASD. And this was supported by 60 member states, including South Africa. Unfortunately, the profile of children in KZN hasn't significantly changed from Dr. Mubewa's description some years ago, when he described that most of the children that we see remain predominantly male. Many of them are highly dependent on others for assistance because of delay in diagnosis and early intervention. The majority of these children having no speech, having IQ less than 60, and often having comorbid epilepsy. Many of these children have showed a pattern of regression in their milestones. Some of them have no ability to communicate. They may also have difficulty with speech. They may have problems with accessing medication. And the majority were not necessarily assessed by a psychiatrist or pediatrician, but often maybe by our para-allied team, which is also important, but would be nice for a medical workup as well. So we have several local challenges. I think the biggest issue being the treatment gap for me. And the treatment gap refers to there are lots of children with neurodevelopmental and mental illnesses. It's thought to be that at least half the children and adolescents globally require some kind of mental support. But the number of children who actually receive and access care is less than 10%. And this is worldwide, not only in South Africa. So whilst it may be easier to close this treatment gap in other settings where there may be greater will and financial support, we still have a long way to go in many patients simply accessing screening and assessment, let alone good multidisciplinary intervention type care. The late diagnosis also relates then to more complications and more difficulty in treating children who are older and who have had neurodevelopmental issues for some time. We often lack multidisciplinary support, especially in more rural areas. It's really only available in the urban sort of regional or specialist level hospitals. There's a lack of diagnostic tools that have been culturally adapted for our setting to assess child neurodevelopmental problems properly. The support for adolescents and adults with ASD is severely lacking in the state sector, as most of our focus thus far has been on children. And then there's a lack of inpatient child psychiatry units. So if a child does really need admission, we really only have one inpatient child or adolescent unit for 12 to 18-year-olds in Pietermaritzburg currently, which I think has 6 beds, which is a really gross miss in our service delivery. There may be many reasons why these patients are diagnosed late, and one of those could be healthcare factors, because we don't have, the system is overburdened and we don't have enough people to do the assessments. There may be parent and caregiver factors where parents are not willing to send their children for assessment because they're worried about, being in denial about it, or they're not aware of this diagnosis, etc. There may be cultural factors, there may be stigma issues, and there may be other psychosocial factors such as poverty, not having money to go to a clinic, etc., that may result in late diagnosis. From a healthcare perspective, we need to remember that we are in KwaZulu-Natal a population of 11.4 million people with high rates of unemployment, HIV, a lot of people still living below the poverty line, a high rate of infant mortality, lots of female-headed households, and a very high, many of our population still being under the age of 18. We also are one of the provinces with very poor mental health service funding and development. And this has been illustrated from some years ago in an article by Prof. Burns. This was actually, I think, around 2010. Unfortunately, over the years, I don't think much has changed. We currently have 3 child psychiatrists in KwaZulu-Natal in the state sector, 2 in Durban and 1 in Pietermaritzburg. We do have someone who is kind of a child psychiatrist at RK Khan as well, but currently not acknowledged by HVCSA. We have, there were 32 psychiatrists in state sector in 2014. I suspect that number isn't more than 40 at the moment, because not many new posts have been created over time and people have left to go into the private sector. I'm sure the situation is similar with pediatricians, although maybe a little bit better than with psychiatry. Psychologist has been short forever. There's been a lack of posts being created, and therefore finding clinical psychologists even in the urban hospitals has been a challenge. Because of the disintegration between Department of Education and Department of Health, we don't really have educational psychologists in our clinical settings, except for the one educational psychologist I'm aware of at KZN Children's. And similarly, I think we can narrate a similar story for all our allied support services, with significant shortages, especially outside of the main hospitals. In terms of resources, in terms of medical doctors, you can see South Africa is 7.7, which is a little bit better off than our neighboring countries, but still not good enough. In terms of doctors by province, KwaZulu-Natal is at 5.2, which is significantly lower than the Western Cape or Gauteng, which has almost double the number of doctors per population, 10,000 population. In terms of structural resources, so I think the good thing is that healthcare is free to children under 6. We do have some kind of state funding or financial support for caregivers of children with ASD. there is improving child and adolescent psychiatric facilities as an outpatient. Schooling needs, as we've heard from the other speakers, are being recognized, and we have had more ASD units opening, although there's still a gap. And there's still a major gap in terms of adolescent and adult centers for people with ASD. So ideally, we need to have all children with ASD, adolescents and adults should have access to the full MDT team. And this can only happen with more advocacy, more training, and more funding being channeled towards these areas. Currently, we do have one set of neurodevelopmental clinics. These are at Nkosi Albert Luthuli Hospital, KZN Children's Hospital. Ray's Hospital had a clinic. I'm not sure if that's still running. Town Hill Hospital does have a clinic, and King Dinizulu has a child and adolescent clinic. Also, King Edward runs a specialist child and adolescent clinic. We also have a collaboration between pediatric neurology and psychiatry with clinics at Nkosi Albert Luthuli and KZN Children's Hospital. So children who are referred either by pediatrics or psychiatry will come through the system, but it does take time and there is a booking list. However, remember that we have to try and transfer skills to everyone. So the way we work in South Africa is that all psychiatrists see children. And therefore, there are fortunately several hospitals across the province that do have psychiatrists. And if you are struggling, maybe try to get that individual at least to a hospital that has a psychiatric service. And I've listed some of these hospitals on the slide. So while there are many challenges, we should never forget that there's also hope. There are some resources available. And over the years, I hope I have seen some improvement in autism care. So I think importantly for us now is to focus on transfer of skills to other healthcare practitioners, focusing on training of doctors across the board, nurses across the board, in being able to screen and recognize ASD. We also have a group of nurses called advanced psych nurses who have been trained particularly in ASD and other child mental illnesses, who we should ensure become our leaders of child mental health services in the units that they are placed. Parent advocacy, I think, remains critical. We have to have a voice, and that voice often is most meaningful when it comes from the community. So we would really encourage as much parent advocacy, community involvement, so that we make sure that our communities integrate our people with autism into them. And finally, I think there also needs to be collaboration between Department of Education, Department of Social Development, Department of Health, etc. These are disorders that require an integrated view and service, and isolated services become a barrier for accessing care sometimes. So in conclusion, it takes a village to raise a child generally, and it takes a child with autism the ability to raise the consciousness of this village. To measure the success of our society, we should check how well those with different abilities, including people with autism, are integrated as full and valued members of our society. This was from Ban Ki-moon, who was the United Nations former Secretary General. Thank you.
Thank you, Sahida. Really appreciate it. Just a whole overview of the health system's challenges and issues, even at personal level, the recognition of autism among our children. Thank you very much. Really informative. Can I please check whether Himesh is, are you sorted, Himesh? Can you come on and present? Thank
Yes,
you.
I can.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Because I am sharing. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much to the conveners for asking me to speak. I am going to be focusing on the psychosocial challenges within the autism community. The act that governs children or children's rights and movement is the Children's Act number 38 of 2005. And this act makes provision for all children, including children with disabilities. There's actually a whole chapter on children with disabilities. The primary aim is to protect children and to provide them with the best possible care, preferably within a family environment. The Department of Social Development are the keepers of this act, together with other relevant government departments, for example, Department of Justice. Okay. Today, I'm going to be focusing on the following: parent support, school placements, crisis care, respite care, shelters, housing, care dependency grants, advocacy, and a way forward. I'm going to start with school placement because this is the bane of every parent's life and every professional's life as well. Okay, it's a real struggle for parents and caregivers as there are long waiting lists. They don't accept children who are not toileting independently. The children must fit into the school's program. Okay, the schools are not meeting the children's need for support and academic needs as well. Special schools are not, some special schools are not including autistic learners. There's limited access to occupational therapy, physiotherapy, and speech therapy within the school environment. There's definitely a lack of resources within the schools. For example, very, very few schools, special schools, provide devices or resources for the non-speaking autistic learner. Inclusion is not happening in mainstream schools, especially for those children with low support needs. Parent support, it's huge. I see and hear parents crying on a daily basis. What I see is mostly single parents and caregivers. Often the caregivers are in denial. They have not accepted the child's diagnosis. There's non-involvement of fathers and or other role models, male role models. There's a lack of support from extended family and others, for example, community. Parents are very overwhelmed by their diagnosis of their child. They have many, many stressors. Special schooling is top of the list. There's housing, finances, GBV, employment and unemployment, and I think I can spend the next 4 hours talking about this. Parent support, what we currently have. Okay. Presently in eThekwini, we have Action in Autism. They run a parent support group on a monthly basis. Action in Autism has also got a WhatsApp support group that was initiated at the onset of COVID-19 because we couldn't have the face-to-face meetings, and our families were really struggling during that time. Our group, the Action in Autism support group, filled up very quickly that we have no space on the WhatsApp support group to add new parents. We have capacity building programs. There are support and awareness programs at some hospitals. At KZN Children's Hospital, we have been offering individual psychosocial counseling by the social workers and the psychologists. Stressors of caregivers. You'll see I'm bringing education or schooling in again because it's such a huge issue. Early childhood development and early childhood intervention. Every parent, as soon as they hear the diagnosis and they accept it, they want to know, what can I do for my child? And there are so few facilities. They also have they have to make a decision. Do I choose a special school or do I choose a mainstream school for my child? Okay. My child needs OT and speech within the school environment. How am I going to get it? Because mainstream schools don't have that. How am I going to pay school fees? How am I going to transport my child to school? Because my child won't get in the taxi. I cannot afford to have a private taxi, take my child because it's too expensive. The mere fact that schools are insisting on toilet, the children having to toilet independently as being a prerequisite before they can get admitted. The whole school admission process, especially for special schools, is such a mission for our parents. I'm going to deal with each one in detail. In terms of education, our challenge for early childhood development and early childhood intervention, we actually have minimal stuff. We have Action in Autism, which is an NPO that renders early intervention. Browns and Open Air are government schools. They have early intervention programs for children that are autistic. There are a few private facilities, but often our parents cannot afford that. Okay. In terms of deciding special school versus mainstream school, at present we have 41 LSEN or special schools that include autistic learners. Our mainstream schools and full service schools offer very little support to children with autism that are attending them. Okay. School fees. In terms of the Schools Act, provision is made for concession of school fees, and the schools apply a means test. But schools or Department of Education schools don't tell the parents about it. And so parents get so stressed about this. They often come to me and say, I can't afford 18,000 rands for school fees. And I'll say to them, if there's no income into the house except the grant, go to the school and apply and tell the school you want to apply for the fees concession. And then they get 0 rated for fees. So schools are not telling parents about it. Transporting their children to school. There's limited transport at special schools, and parents are expected to pay for this service in addition to the school fees. Okay. Toilet training as a prerequisite for admission. Okay. Most special schools require children to be toilet trained or toileting independently before they will consider taking them in. We do have the exception of 1 or 2 schools that have ASD units that will take a child that's not toilet trained, but they far apart. Okay, there's a lack of teacher aides, child caregivers at school, and facilitators. And again, facilitators cost money. And if the only income into the home is a grant, they can't pay school fees and transport and for a facilitator. The only option that parents have if the child is not toilet trained is to find a daycare and send the child to a daycare. And often daycares are not equipped to take in children with autism. The Department of Education has a transversal team, but they will only support a child with autism if the child meets the criteria for learners with special needs, especially intellectual disability, because I think they're getting funding from Treasury, especially for intellectual disability. Okay. Access to OT, speech therapy, and physiotherapy within the school environment. Special schools do not always have the allied staff to provide the therapy. There's been a moratorium on posts, both in the Department of Education and the Department of Health. So I think all allied staff are really stretched at the moment. School application and the assessment process. There are long waiting lists. Some schools have a waiting list up to 4 years. Each school has its own criteria for admission. The child must meet the school's criteria. The school is not necessarily meeting the academic or training needs of the child. In law, there's provision made for transport of special needs learners But the reality is some special schools have non-functional modes of transport. Parents have to contribute. Department of Education has fostered a partnership with Dial-A-Ride, and parents pay at a reduced rate. Parents are complaining that transport is very unreliable. I had one parent or more than one parent say to me, my child goes on rotation because the bus does different routes each day. My child doesn't understand that. My child's routine is disrupted. Okay. Housing is another big challenge for parents or caregivers. Families are either nuclear or they live within extended families. Okay. If they live in extended families, it's crowded accommodation, there's lack of privacy, the child is not able to self-regulate under these conditions. Currently, there's provision in law for disabled persons to access housing, and they should be given priority. But in reality, this is not happening. We've made unsuccessful applications to eThekwini Municipality's Housing Department, as well as Department of Human Settlements, and zero, nothing. The next challenge is social assistance and the care dependency grants. The whole issue about qualification criteria to get this grant. Issues around the age of diagnosis. Some people, some professionals feel only at age 5 they want to make this diagnosis. So they deny parents the opportunity to apply at a younger age. Some professionals are saying you can only apply for this grant if the child is admitted to a school. Okay, there needs to be training of medical personnel. We at KZN Children's Hospital are encouraging early diagnosis, and I think you heard both the doctors saying around 2.5 to 3 years of age. Okay, school admission is not a prerequisite for the care dependency grant. Okay, often medical personnel need to be retrained regarding the qualification criteria, including the district surgeons. Okay, KZN Children's Hospital, we initiated a project with the South African Social Security Agency, known as SASSA. We signed a memorandum of understanding in 2014, where Dr. Vasantha Govender will complete the care dependency medicals on behalf of SASSA for difficult to process cases. For example, your learning disabilities and your children who are autistic that have good cognition, because these are the children that normally fail the district surgeon's assessment. And this project was initiated as the result of our children failing these assessments at the district surgeon. To date, the hospital has processed approximately 700 care dependency grants. Okay, employment of parents and adult ASDs is also another challenge. Parents struggle to obtain employment as they are the primary caregivers of the children. Employment is limited and dependent on school hours and timetables. Okay, there's definitely a lack of opportunities available for these caregivers, especially in terms of government-funded programs. For example, your public works program, where they take on community members for a period of 1 year. There's no capacity, there's very few capacity building programs for our parents and caregivers to become self-employed entrepreneurs. Okay. There's also very limited finances for our caregivers to employ additional help or facilitators. Okay. With regards to work opportunities for our adult ASD, very difficult to access learnerships, and employment programs are very limited. Crisis care and placements. At present, we have no respite care, no gender-based violence shelters or safe houses for our autistic communities. The Children's Act again makes provision for crisis care and respite care for our disabled children, right? The Department of Social Development has established and funds such centers. However, no provision again for our families with ASD needs. Okay, I'm going to tell you about a case study. In 2022, Action in Autism had a young female, age 19, with autism. The history was that the mother was deceased. The stepfather and the sibling abandoned her after the death of the mother about 6 months later, as they could not cope with her. She was grieving, she was having meltdowns. She was then handed to Department of Social Development for placement. DSD placed her in a care facility for the severely physically disabled, and she did not fit in. Okay, she was subsequently admitted to the local hospital due to her behavior presentation. On discharge, she was again admitted to another facility for adults that were physically disabled. She had an incident there. She assaulted a fellow resident, and she was thus excluded from there. She was readmitted to the local district hospital for adjustment in her meds. She didn't need the actual adjustment in meds. Social Development was unable to place her, and they requested the assistance of Action in Autism. No respite care facility for special needs adult was willing to admit her because of her meltdowns. Amgeni Hospital was a possibility. However, she was found to have low support needs. Thus, she was admitted at Action in Autism. They have a little respite flatlet, which their parents have been using. It's not registered for people with ASD, but Lisa Aziz managed to obtain permission from the Department of Social Development to house her there because they had no other option to place her anywhere else. And this was supposed to have been a temporary measure. It has been quite a learning curve, I think, for Action in Autism, having this young adult at their center. I think the question is, where does this young person go to? How long is she going to stay at Action in Autism's respite center? Because it's not long term, okay? DSD doesn't have any answers for us as yet. Okay. A way forward, I think there needs to be a formation of multi-sectorial task teams to address early childhood development, early childhood intervention, school admissions, long-term admissions to care facilities, the issue of housing, transport, etc., all the things that I've discussed. We need to foster partnerships with the Department of Social Development, health, education, transport, human settlements, SASA, and the Department of Labor. All these departments cannot work in silos. We need to definitely do more advocacy to give the best to our autism community. There needs to be development of legislation to ensure service delivery to persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Himesh.
Thank you. We're now going to go on to the Q&A session. I see we have a limited amount of time, giving ourselves just 22 minutes for Q&A. Can I kindly ask all our panelists to put their cameras on so we can actually see you? That would be wonderful. I think one of the objectives of the workshop was to discuss the challenges, and we certainly got lots of challenges, quite a overwhelming amount of challenges, which is disconcerting. Since we've been in the field of autism, it has improved, but very marginally, and we want to see greater improvement throughout the autistic community and to the families that support them. So this is the reason why we are here. We tried to get together a multi-sectoral team and of course include autistic people. Unfortunately, we have only one autistic with us today. It was about sharing good practice, but it's also about establishing a coordinated approach. And with that in mind, I'm going to go through the list of questions that have been directed to us, but I'm wondering if our host at UKZN can also allow our participants to ask their questions. So if they could put them on, and can I please and kindly ask you to be as brief as possible so we can get as many people as possible asking their questions or making their comments. So host, would you kindly put on, allow all our participants to ask their questions? And in the interim, I'm going to go, and that is verbal questions first. Can you also identify yourself before you ask the questions? I'm going to quickly go to our Q&A, and I'm going to ask any one of our panelists to make comments. Afternoon all, this is from Namonde. I would like to ask, how do you tell a parent that their child is not normal? And I mean, we can phrase that in a more humane way and say is different and needs special support, because in my community, I see a lot of autistic children that are expected to be neurotypical, to do neurotypical activities, and parents are punishing them for failing to fit in and be like others. I'm going to ask the next question, three questions in total, and then any one of you can answer that. As a parent to one teen with autism, there is a little family support, and my son feels lonely not being able to interact with other young people, as he doesn't fit in with his cousins and their interests. That's question number 2. And question number 3 from Tandeka is it possible for a child to be diagnosed with ASD spectrum after an EEG, an ENT, and MRI assessment have been done? Okay, the last one is specifically a medical question. I'm thinking, Nelly, would you like to answer the very first question?
Hello. Unfortunately, I don't have a pen with me here, but the first question was, is it easy to tell a parent that their child is exhibiting autistic symptoms? I think it can depend on how one, I think the best way would be to refer a parent, maybe try and speak to the parent and find out if the parent is also aware of the challenges. Then the parent can then be referred to either to a hospital or a local clinic or any other place where an assessment can be done.
Maybe Humesh, you can also come in where parents are in denial. How do you approach that?
When parents are in denial, it's difficult, in fact, to deal with that. But I think the most best way to deal with it is to first listen to the parent and then share. I always share with parents, some of the parents that have got autistic children, and also to mention to them that they are not the only one, because when somebody is engulfed with a problem, they tend to think that they're the only one who's having that problem. But when you share with them, I normally share with them through a cell phone where I go to Google, I identify people who are autistic, or I would share if there's somebody that is well known. But I think also to talk to the parent, depending on the level of that particular parent. But trying to let the parent understand that it's not her fault to have a child with autism, and that they are not the only ones. There are other people out there. But also, I always refer them also to a support group where they can share, they can listen to other parents talking, and also understand that whatever that they are experiencing, they are not the only ones, but there are people who have experienced that, but who have mastered, and they are now coping, and they are able to move on with their lives and supporting their children. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that question was adequately answered. Thank you very much. And also just to give the parents space until they realize that they have to seek help, because you often find that actually in autism as well. The second question is the loneliness that teenagers and adolescents go through. I know, Shada, you referred specifically to the adolescent stage and the real sense of loneliness that comes. Would you like to make comment on that?
Hi, everyone. I think, needs change across your lifespan. And obviously in adolescence, one's developmental needs change. Adolescents typically require peer evaluation. They base themselves on looking at their peers. So obviously the isolation that some people with autism may experience can be quite difficult. But I think what may be useful is to have a group of, a safe group where there are people who understand that adolescents' needs. So, I think if you disclose to a few good friends or family members and your cousins that this is the challenges that this individual faces, and let's work together on this. And that, I think, helps create a safe network for that adolescent to socialize in. I think sometimes the problem is that parents try to, because of stigma and shame issues, not let other people know that their child may have certain special needs. And then this creates bigger barriers for that adolescent. Also, I think the adolescent peer support group that your organization runs, Lisa, is often a good stepping stone for the child, because they again in a facilitated environment where they can start off, testing the waters in terms of how to develop their own relationships, and then obviously move on to doing that more independently later on.
Thank you, Sada. I wonder, Vasantha, would you like to answer the last question, that the child has been through all a series of tests and everything came back, there was no negative report. Would you like to answer that?
Yes, sure. It's often in children with autism, the MRIs can be normal, the
Umesh, Vasantha, I wonder if you could move around a little bit, because sometimes you sound very clear, and then the other times we completely lose you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Perfect, yeah.
Okay, so it's the MRIs and the EEGs are often normal. So what we try to explain, to parents is the problem, with autism is that the actual, connections in the brain, how the brain is actually wired, is different. And to make a diagnosis of autism, we assess the child as properly, and it's not the MRI and EEG that makes the diagnosis. And we parents obviously have difficulty in understanding, the MRI is normal, but my child still has autism. So we try and explain, to them the different, components of autism in terms of problems with the child's communication, the child's behavior, that makes that diagnosis still there. And it's sometimes it takes a whole team to sort of get through to the child. It's not sometimes one counseling session, but it takes multiple times to, for the patient, for accept the diagnosis.
Thank you, Vasantha. What I did hear you say, and if I can quickly repeat it for those who might have missed it, is that they can go through a slate of tests and everything comes back normal. And so that is not the criteria by which you diagnose autism. And that's what parents need to know. If I summed it out correctly, Saida, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But that is what I understood by what you said, and that it is parents expect something to be wrong, and generally that is not the case in terms of the test that they go through.
Clinical diagnosis.
Someone asked a question that I think, sorry, Shada, you wanted to say?
Sorry, I was just saying it's a clinical diagnosis, and often we make it over multiple observations over a period of time. One doesn't have to rush and label something as ASD on the first visit. You know, one can review the child a few times and then make a final diagnosis. But there's no test that tells you this is ASD and this is not ASD.
Thank you. And then Sama has a question, and I think it should be you, Humesh, because she speaks to, thank you for such an informative presentation. I am concerned about the fact that the focus is so much more on psychological point of view that the social point of view is lost. Autism has to do with social communication functioning and the well-being of individuals and their families, which requires social work skills. There is a great need to involve social workers in the management of autism. And maybe you can reflect on that, Humesh.
Hi, Lisa. Yeah, definitely social workers have a role to play. I do a lot of autism awareness with our newly diagnosed parents. I think often when they hear it from the doctor, they are in shock. When they come to my office afterwards and I say to them, what did the doctor say? They heard nothing. Often they heard nothing what the doctor said. So having pamphlets and booklets helps. And then we try and explain to them what is available. There's a lot of guilt with the parents, so we have to work through that guilt. It's all part of the grieving process, you know, denial, acceptance. So we do spend a lot of time with them, and both social workers and psychologists can actually get involved there. But families definitely need more support at community level, not just at hospital level. So whether you're a child welfare social worker or a DSD social worker, if you learn enough about autism, I think you would be able to provide necessary supports for the family. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, but we need to implement more community support resource. I think that's
Yes.
the most important thing.
Yeah.
Spume asked a really wonderful question. Is there a way that UKZN can be made aware that we need an increase in the enrollment of psychology students? And definitely there is such a huge need. I think Nelly drew it to our attention that there are so few psychologists for our population group. And that is a real pity because we have so many mental health illnesses based on the series of disasters that we've been going through, COVID and looting and floods. So I think the need is really there. And I'm hoping that the UKZN, the voices are here and they're listening to this, and that we can increase this at tertiary level, increase the numbers of programs that offer learning in terms of catering and supporting people with autism. And I'm hoping that that can be the case. And then there is a question from Hannah, who asks what is being done specifically for girls with autism and the way in which they present. I'm not too sure who would like to answer that. Shaida, would you like to give it a go?
Hi. So girls may have less hyperactivity problems, but there are no specific gender differences. Vasantha, you can maybe correct me with regards to males or females with autism. So I'm not quite sure where the question was leading to, because I would like to think that we give both genders equal care and equal access currently. Just that the prevalence of autism is higher in males.
I think that what Hannah might be saying, and I don't know if she's here to actually clarify, but does it manifest the symptoms of autism? Does it manifest the same way as you are boys and girls, autistic boys and girls, different in how we see autism?
No, they would manifest in a similar way. So the core features would not be different in terms of the social behavior, the social communication, and the stereotypic repetitive behavior. Those two core symptoms must be present. Maybe some of the comorbidities may differ, such as boys may be more hyperactive or more disruptive, etc. But essentially, in terms of the core symptoms, there are no gender differences.
Yes, I agree as well. Autism is commoner in boys, and the other thing is that girls often tend to be, quieter, and as Sarah said, hyperactivity is more prominent, and anxiety can be more of a problem sometimes in girls as well. But they will have the same features. Autism will be the same in both of them.
Sorry, we completely lost you there again, Basantha. If you could just move yourself around, that would be great.
Okay, no, I just agreed with what she had said.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that those of us on the ground do see a difference, but maybe it's just also what Hannah's been saying, the way in which girls and boys are socialized. So there's a lot of masking going on, a lot more masking going on with girls than there are with boys. And maybe that might be the case that we are recognizing. Yeah. And then, Helen, I know you've asked for the view from our autistic gentleman, but unfortunately, because of connectivity issues, he couldn't rejoin, and we are trying to get him back online, and hopefully we can before the session ends. Eurisha, you've mentioned what are the key factors of finalizing a school? Should they attend a special needs or mainstream? I have 2 kids, 4 and 5, both autistic, with the elder being low functioning. I would use the word a person with high support needs. We're trying to change the narrative around language. I don't know if you want to answer this, Nelly.
Okay. I think it's not easy to rate which institution is good and which one is not. But I think the main issue would be the kind of specialist support that is available in that particular school. So if a school has got therapist, has got the speech and the OT, has got the psychologist, for me, that would be the best school. But the issue is, how many do they have those specialists? Because the reality is there are like 3 or 4 who have got psychologists. So for me, I would say the parent can play around in trying to find the right school, but as long as there will be, the parent can also look at the type of intervention that is provided in that particular school, I think. Because most of the schools, let me say this again, they don't have specialist support, especially those in rural areas. But in town, for Pinetown, for Mgungundlovu, and for Umlazi, those schools are very much, because they do have therapy, and some, they do have a psychologist. But the issue would be the availability of space. Does the school have space for your child? That's another question also.
And Eurisha, I have to also add that our options are very limited. As parents and autistic people, there are very limited options that we have available. So that's why we have to continue the advocacy. And that's what came out very strongly from all of the panelists that spoke. Karen Ijumba says, thank you to all the presenters. This was very insightful. Is there some type of scorecard for ECDs and schools that allows one to rate these institutions according to a child's diagnosis? As a mom of a 4-year-old autistic, my main concern is placing him in the right learning environment, but a lack of access as to which institutions offers what kind of support and how to score the institution accordingly makes this difficult. And here again, I'm going to throw it at you, Nelly.
Oh, okay. I think I missed the first question. The first question was about the 2 kids who are 4 and 5, where the mother is asking whether the child should attend a mainstream or special needs. I think the main issue would be the kind of, the level of support that is required by the child. If the child requires low level of support, that child can go to a mainstream school. But then it is imperative that the parent refers, make sure that the parent engages with the school, makes the school aware of the challenges that the child is experiencing, and also refer to the district so that there would be some kind of support from the district as well. Because if it's only the school, then the child won't be able to have that support from the district. So for me, I would say the level of support required by the child is the determinant of whether to go to a special school or a mainstream school. But from what I know is special schools, they only accommodate those autistic children who require high levels of support. And then for the other question from Karen Ijumba, I would say for a 4-year-old, you need to look for those crutches that provide those services that are preparing kids to go to school. It will depend as to where you are, but when you are around Durban, there are a few. Action in Autism is one of them. You can also speak to Action in Autism. I'm not trying to sell them, but there is also one in Windermere Center. They are having like 3 autistic children. It's an inclusive environment, but they are assisting and they also provide some assistance, some therapeutic assistance to the child. So I think it will depend as to where you are. But the main issue would be to check, does that center or does that school have the necessary support, specialist support that would render interventions to your child? That is key number 1, because taking a child to a special school just for the sake of being accessing education, the issue is not accessing education. The issue is accessing quality education where the child will be assisted holistically in all spheres, like we've been talking about multidisciplinary teams and all of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nelly. And then this question from Machediso, who says, these are excellent presentations. How can adolescents and adults with autism be helped? The emphasis is mostly on younger children. And I have to say that has been that has been very true, and that us as seasoned parents also see that there is a trajectory growth with our autistic child, you know, that the changes during the lifespan in terms of their needs, and that we need to address adult needs very much so, as well as adolescent needs. And I'm going to throw that to you, Shaida, because you see both young people, our children, well, more of our adolescents and adults, because it's the center that sees our children in terms of diagnosis and ongoing management. Shaida, you still there?
Hi. So
So my question is, what can be done? How much more can we do for adolescents and adults with autism?
So I think obviously there's a difference in the needs. So with children, often we are looking more at basic educational needs. We're looking at speech therapy, physio, OT, trying to make sure that we strengthen the functioning they have to the best of their capacity and drop the deficits as much as possible. In adolescence, the focus may change somewhat, because now the focus may be more on adaptation to the new into the adult environment. So we're looking more at tertiary education needs for those who can go into a tertiary education system. We're looking at work employment environment, so jobs that they could get into where maybe the social interaction is not as intense as in other situations. So maybe occupational therapy for vocational rehabilitation. Also, sometimes this is the stage in which anxiety and mood problems start coming through. So we may need clinical psychology support for that. And then also, obviously, development of relationships with their peers and with the opposite sex. So depending on, especially higher functioning people with autism, their needs may be somewhat different. And each program has to be individualized to that individual. There's no kind of one shoe fits all kind of therapy. So depending on the resources that that individual has and what their needs are, then one would design a program to fit for them.
Thank you so much, Shaida. An anonymous attendee says, working on the ground zero with ASD children, when will we see more training in foundation phase schools? More damage is done without the proper training provided. This is not the teacher's fault, but the lack of education for teachers who are teaching ASD children. Is there a training program coming to schools? And hopefully now that the Department of Education has taken over ECD, we would hopefully see more teacher development. But Nelly, I'm going to throw it back at you and maybe you can comment as well.
Sorry, Nelly, I didn't hear.
The person is asking that there's many ECD teachers that are not trained, and this is doing a lot of damage, can result in a lot of damage done to the child. And when is it that we can see more teacher training within the ECD, within ECD?
Oh, thank you so much. What education is doing at the moment, there are trainings that are conducted to grade our educators and foundation phase educators with regards to the CS. Because when we talk of the CS, it gives you skills on how to screen, to identify, to assess, and also to provide the relevant support. Because as teachers are not supposed to diagnose, but they only screen and identify and then refer to the relevant structures. So there are trainings that are being conducted. And since ECD is joining SNES now, so we are going to be seeing more trainings being rolled out. I'm sure maybe after June or maybe towards the end of the year, we're going to be seeing more trainings being rolled out in order to capacitate educators from ECD so that they are able to identify these learners and refer them to the relevant structures as soon as possible so that they can get the relevant intervention.
Thank you, Nelly. So this is a very important question, and it is something that we can look at as a way forward. And I know that Humesh has already spoken to this. Schooling, is Department of Education working together with the Department of Health at the present moment? No, not so. In trying to register the school centers for autistic children, I ask because most are not registered, yet they end up being the only option for most parents. So there are a lot of private schools out there, and a lot of private schools, some of them, not all of them, offering cures and treatments, etc. And we know that autism is a lifelong disability, and we need to embrace that and accept that. And I mean, once we get into acceptance mode, then we can teach them the way in which they learn. And so I think that is a question, and I don't think anybody has an answer because it is not the case. Now, these departments are actually working in silos, whether it be health, DSD, Department of Transport, Department of Education. And that is one way in which we can pitch a way forward. If there are no other questions, Helen has said, same with health professionals, they need special and deep training in autism. what do our medical students get? And I think Vasantha and Shaida can attest to the fact that at undergrad level, they get very little, if nothing at all. And if I'm wrong, please jump in. Okay, I'm now going to quickly have quick final comments, and then I'm going to hand back to our host, Chulafelo, to close up the session. So I don't know if our panelists quickly just want to make some rounding comments in terms of a way forward, because that's why we were here, to look at a multidisciplinary team. And in terms of the team that was given, I also want to say we need to include the speech language therapist in that team. That was presented to us by, I think, Shaida. Yeah, as well as, most importantly, autistic people themselves.
Shaida has unfortunately left. She had a commitment she had to go to. Thanks.
Does anybody want to quickly round up, make final statements? Humesh, Mneli?
For me, I would say I just wish a higher education institution can increase the number of psychologists that are being trained on a yearly basis. That is number one. Number two, I so wish to see an MOU between a Department of Health and Department of Education. I know in my district, we recently had a meeting between the therapists, the rehabilitation center, as well as SNES, where we were looking at the expertise that we have. You know, within Department of Education, we are still depleted. So what we did was to request help where it's possible, to say that maybe when we conduct trainings, we can have just a member coming to present, let's say maybe perceptual skills or whatever. Maybe a speech therapist would come in just for 30 minutes just to provide the training. I think that's the only way we can bridge the gap, because there are so many vacant posts with Department of Education. So just an MOU between the two, DOH and DOE, because we are serving the same client. I think it can help and go a long way for me. That's all I'm asking.
Thank you, Nelly. Humesh, do you want to quickly round up and say what you need to?
I think I said it already in my way forward. I think maybe we need to set some timelines about fostering these relationships with the different state departments. And I think it's just not the district offices that we need to be liaising with. We actually need to liaise at a provincial level. Because I'm not so sure how much of power or decision-making powers for example, DSD district office actually has.
Thank you, Humesh. And I'm not too sure, Gugu, would you like to say something?
Can I just, yes, can I just add, I think the previous speaker is correct, because the people who have got, you know, the powers, that is the provincial level. They are the ones that can liaise at a provincial level, DOH, DOE, at a provincial level. They are the ones who have got the power, you know, to make decisions. At a district level, we are just working, you know, we are just hands-on, we are working on the field, but we do not have powers to make decisions. Maybe it's a suggestion that maybe if ever we do have such a webinar again, maybe if an invite can go to a provincial health and provincial education, maybe provincial DSD as well.
Thank you, Nelly.
Thank you to everyone. I've gained a lot of knowledge. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Gugu. If there are no other presenters here, I mean, Humesh, we've heard Nelly, we've heard Gugu. I'm not too sure if Vasantha's here or Shaida's here, and Prashant is definitely not here. Then I'm going to hand it back to you, Chulafelo, just to say a great big thank you. I think this was incredible webinar. I think we've just touched the surface right now. We really need to dig deep, put our hands together and create a coordinated service. Chulafelo, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that Q&A session. Thank you, everybody, for bringing in, bringing forward all the issues and including the way forward on this. And I agree with you, Nelly, that we need another platform or an indaba of some sort where we get all the stakeholders together from the different various departments and all levels of, the multidisciplinary teams to come together and look at the challenges and the way forward in an attempt to integrate and have a seamless systems approach to this, because we have noted all the different challenges that have been spoken, and we have actually recognized where the problem is. So are we happy, all of us, to take this forward in that approach, in that manner? If we can have another platform. Yes, Nelly?
No. I was saying yes. For me, it's a yes.
Yes. Thank you so much. So Lisa, how do we proceed on that?
I think that we would have to either do this through an NGO like Action in Autism to bring all the stakeholders together with UKZN. I think a platform that brings in the research and academia would be amazing and wonderful. So we would like to extend this invitation to UKZN to take on this challenge for us. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. On that note, can I just thank all the panelists? Thank you, all the audience. We really appreciate that. And keep your eyes and your ears open, and we will definitely take this on and forward. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
So we needed a group
photo,
yes.
We need a group photo.
Some of the panelists are gone.
Yes, can we all just show our videos, open our videos for the group photo? Thank you. Before we close.
I don't know what I did.
Is this everyone? I see Humesh is not there, but there's so many Humeshes.
Yeah.
The right Humesh has put her camera on.
Oh, okay. Get ready. I'm gonna take it. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
What an informative session. Thank you very much, Dr. Mhlaba. We'll be assisting you in doing the conference.
Sure, thank you so much. Yeah, no, we have to take this on. It has to happen. I mean, the challenge is, oh my goodness, it's terrible. We haven't spread the surface on this. Yeah.
No, but it's really informative. I just feel sorry for people we lost because of technical issues.
Yeah.
But we'll send them all the information.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Thank you so much.
So you'll send me the presentations, because I have everyone's emails. We had 250 people who RSVP, so we'll send to all of them. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, great.
And then when we started, we had about 178.
Yeah. Okay. No, that was a good turnout, eh? It just shows how the problem is so pressing for a lot of people.
Yeah,
so,
and we never...
Are we still recording, Nombuso?
Oh. I thought Kat stopped it. No, bye. I'm ending it.
Okay. Are you able to cut the especially the first part where we had all the glitches and problems?
I'll speak to Kat. I'm sure he'll be able to.
Yeah, so it's that way I was starting, getting everything.